Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pole Studios, and this is live, so something's gonna happen. There's you've not seen me for a week or two, probably because I've not been very well. I've been full of a stinking cold, and also I've been trying to prepare to move house. So in the meantime, that's my personal stuff. Back to business. I'm back. So. New week, new product. Today we have the Slate Digital FG-Stress, and I'm very excited to play with this. So excited, in fact, that I already kind of got ahead of myself a little bit and started playing with it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna work on a mix today. Or at least I'm going to show you a mix I've been working on. This is something you may have already seen. This is Mississippi Queen by Mountain, except that this version is by me and my dad, and my friend Neil on drums. So if I switch over to the other screen, this is what people want to see. This is the big reveal. This right here in the middle, that is FG-Stress with the big white knobs on the black dial. That beast here is what everyone wants to see and everyone wants to hear. So, without further ado, let's press play. Sounds like this with FG-Stress on pretty much everything. So, it sounds... This mix originally was supposed to be quite vintage. It was supposed to be quite kind of 60s-ish. So, originally there wasn't a lot of compression used, unless it was like vintage tube compressors. The EQ's relatively flat, I guess. And there was a lot of distortion on everything. So, I've changed it quite a bit, backed some of the distortion off, replaced a lot of the compressors with FG-Stress. Now, let's have a look at where we've used FG-Stress. Let's start with the drums. So, there's a lot going on. I've used FG-Stress on the kick. 1 second. Hello? Hello? I hate it when that happens. Sorry about that. Phone calls inconvenient. Anyway, hello. Yes, so the kick. This is my AKG D112, which let's just solo this. So it's quite a vintagey but quite punchy kick. There's also a sub kick underneath it, which sounds like this, which just holds down the low end. So between them we get... Now you can hear a lot of background noise on that. I've not gated the kick, and with it being quite a vintage mix, I decided to leave it that way. If I turn off the FG-Stress, we get a much cleaner sounding, but ultimately not very powerful kick. If I turn that back on, sound off. Now the first thing to note is it is louder coming out of that. So I'll try turning the output down to compare the two. So now that I've matched the volume, you can hear the background noises come up quite a lot, which in this kind of mix doesn't make a difference. It's not a problem. And I've put the compressor after the EQ in this case because I wanted all the low end and the high end to feed the compressor. Now this is where all these little buttons come in. So let's start with the knobs. This seems like this is the first time we've looked at FG-Stress. The input does exactly what you would imagine, but it does a few things on FG-Stress. It's not just affecting how much compression there is, because like a vintage compressor, this doesn't have a threshold dial. It has an input instead, so you whack the input up loud to make it compress more, and generally you turn down the output to match. If I hold down the shift button while I do this, you can see they move opposite each other, the input and output, so that I can really put like no input in and then go the other way. So generally speaking, with the shift key held down to move the input and output with a matched level, you can then play until you get enough gain reduction on the meters or using your ears. I tend to use the meters as an indication that it's doing what it should be doing. I tend to look for the hardest hits being hit, well, doing what they're supposed to do, and the rest of it being relatively organic. Now, the attack and release are interesting. The attack goes past 10, which is interesting. And then the release goes all the way to 0. So they're not measured in milliseconds or anything. It's just an arbitrary number. By the way, I'm drinking the Barefoot Malbec tonight. So if anyone of legal drinking age wants to drink along with me, you are more than welcome to. Please drink responsibly. Oh, that is a good wine. So the 0 is a fast release, and 0 is a fast attack, but we've gone with the slowest attack on here, which is still pretty fast. But it's how we get that punch out of that kick drum. Now, below the output is all the ratios. Now, this is where it gets interesting because it's not as simple. Zeisler Music, hi, nice to see you. Ah, yeah, drink Coca-Cola, yes, red wine for me. The ratios are probably the most important thing, arguably at least, on the distressor. Just 1 second while I pour some wine. Because they don't just subtly change things, they really change things. They're essentially completely different circuits from each other. So we've got 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1. Which the 2 and 3 are relatively gentle, great on drums. 4-to-1, a bit more heavy-handed, also sounds more heavy. The 6-to-1 has a yellow light and is really quite aggressive. The 10-to-1 mode also has this opto mode, which apparently sounds like an optical compressor if you put the settings in the right place. There's 20-to-1, which is almost limiting. There's nuke, which really is like over compression, which is something you might use on like when you're smashing drum overheads. But there's also a 1-to-1 mode. 1-to-1 means no compression. Why would I want that? Why would I not just bypass it? That's where the distressor becomes very clever. Because it's not just a plain old simple boring compressor. It's also a saturation and distortion box. Not distortion as in tons and tons of like guitar amp style distortion, but a sweet kind of distortion where it's just pleasing to the ear. So what you can do, that's where these lights up here come up. The little yellow 1% THD light means that the audio is beginning to distort noticeably, and then the red line comes on and the 1% yellow line goes off when it's really distorting. And that counts a lot more when we come to these next buttons. So let's look at these three buttons here. This one is a high pass filter for the audio, which does exactly what you would expect from an EQ. It just, I think 86 hertz it said it was. It just takes everything out from 86 hertz below and downwards. Nice feature to have. Sure, why not? Below that is distortion 2 and distortion 3. Now you can only have one of these turned on at once, but distortion 2 adds even harmonics, and distortion 3 adds odd harmonics, if I remember correctly. So one gives it a little bit of a crunch, and the next one gives it a real crunch. So let's play this kick drum with no distortion. So let's just... So we can see it redlining with no distortion, and we're on 1-to-1 right now. So if I hit dist 2, so I'll turn this on and off. It's not coming through as like a nasty distortion, but it's just adding with no compression. It's adding kind of a crunch to this kick drum. So I'll turn it on and off. And then dist 3 adds a lot of distortion comparatively. So let's try this. So you hear how it's taking away a lot of the low end and really crunching up this kick. So it's probably not appropriate to use on this kick drum, but it might be great on something like, oh, I don't know, a parallel channel on a snare drum where you want to give it some crunch, but not gritty distortion. Now let's get back to compression. If we just hit play again on this. So the compressor's going, you can see all my lights going. The green lights are going crazy. As it compresses more, it goes yellow, then red. And something that's quite interesting is these detector buttons, which I'm going to talk about now. So these affect the way that the compression happens. So the first one is a filter that takes the low end out of the compression detector, which means that if you've got, like, say you're using a kick drum and one particular hit of the kick drum had some extra sub in there. On a normal compressor, that would suddenly overload the compressor, really bring the volume down, and you'd lose that single hit from the mix. So instead, if you take the ultra low stuff out of the compression chain, then the main bulk of the signal is what controls the compressor and makes the whole thing much more even. So instead of, like, some of this kick drum has some really low stuff in. So if I take this out, it's quite subtle, but you can see how it's now getting all the way down to 10 decibels of compression. If I take some of the low end out, apart from that real hard hit there, which needed the extra compression, the rest of them are only being compressed by about 6 dB. So you get a much more even compression. Might not be what you want in some cases, but the option is there. I would almost always use that detection circuit on something like bass to level it out without any ultra low notes suddenly squashing the compression. The next button is something that I found very interesting. I'm not even going to look at it on here. I'm going to move over to the vocal. So it's very subtle, this one, but I imagine as you really, really compress. So here's my vocal channel. So I've got a little bit of the London saturation, bit of a tube pre. Then we've got FG-Stress here before the EQ. So, as you can see, I'm hitting the input really hard here. And I've got this button engaged. So what does this button do? What this button does is it absolutely hits the compressor with extra around the 6 kilohertz region. So what that means is if you've got quite a punchy, modern, bright vocal going into the compressor, it comes out a lot smoother, because anything that's got harsh sibilants, anything that's kind of nasty up top gets more compressed. So everything comes out of it more evenly. So let's have a listen to this vocal, which is quite heavily compressed as a style.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything.
So let's take off the reverbs and the echo just for a minute. So all we've got going is quite a bit of top end on this Neve EQ, a low end, a high pass filter, which is more aggressive than the FG-Stress was going to provide. And this is running into the tape on the Slate virtual tape machine, and that's it. That's the whole channel. So let's hit play on this again. Now it's dry.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything.
So if I take these away in the detector,
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything.
So that shouldn't be doing much more. I'm looking for quite an aggressive compression on this, which is why the input is so high. But let's try this mid bump on and off.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way. Around Louisiana way. Around Louisiana way.
That's interesting. This higher, more aggressive line with the mid bump into the detector seems to be fatter, warmer, smoother. And I really quite like that. I'm probably going to use it like this on most vocals. Not sure if I'll use it like this on other instruments, but as a vocal compressor, hey. Let's try adding some distortion into this vocal line.
Around Louisiana way.
Oh, that's really...
I lived a Cajun lady. We call her Mississippi Queen.
That's really quite gritty. I mean, if you're going for a style of compression that's got that grit, I now don't need two boxes to do that. Maybe I'll switch back to distortion 2.
Around Louisiana way.
Oh, that's got that modern pop distortion thing going on that's not... Again, not distortion, it's more of almost like a transformer saturation.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen.
That's without.
If you know what I mean. Mississippi Queen. If you know what I mean.
So that's around 1% total harmonic distortion, which is kind of audibly nice. Now, let's try this on 6-1 and see if it absolutely slams it.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything.
Now that seems over compressed, but that could just be because this particular song, being a rock and roll song, needs something a little more organic. So let's try this now back in the mix with this distortion 2 on.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. A Mississippi Queen, oh, she taught me everything.
So now let's add in our... it was just a bit of reverb, and I had Echo Boy going on, which is giving me a kind of slap echo thing where I have a single delay with an LR offset and no feedback to give me... I'll turn the other reverbs off. Just listen to this.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean.
That's very late 60s, early 70s. What they used to actually do was run the feedback from the tape in at the same time, so you'd get kind of a slap. It fills out the sound quite well. And then I've got a bit of reverb going on.
Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean.
Ah, that's right. I turned down the output on the kick.
Queen, if you know what I mean.
Darting around all over the place now, because we went to the vocal to show you the different distortions and everything working properly. So let's look at the snare now. So there's the tape machine going into the rack. So this has quite a lot of distortion on this snare, but it's only tickling the top. This is more as a kind of a fattener of the snare. So the attack is almost as slow as it'll go. The release is as fast as it will go. Let's try turning on and off this FG-Stress on the snare. Okay, so the background noise is coming up quite a lot, but seeing as though it was mic'd relatively cleanly, doesn't seem to be being an issue. Let's play all the drums together and turn this compressor on and off. I'm liking the sound of that snare. Now, on the drums, what else have I done? Right, so this is the drum bus. I was originally using the Monster, which is an 1176 on kind of nuke mode. And that sounded like... I'll turn that off and then try this. And now let's try it as the FG-Stress on nuke mode. Okay, so you can see how it's very quickly compressing nearly 10 dB there, but the mix knob is down at 20%, 30%, 28%. So it's got a little bit of grit and distortion on there, and that's just being blended in with the original drum signal. It seems to be bringing the overall level down slightly, if anything, but it seems to be controlling some of the flubbiness of the kit and giving it an overall kind of punch that's really cutting through. So that's really kind of making the drums jump with that nuke mode. Let's have a look at the bass. Let's see what I've done here. So the bass has quite a complicated signal chain because if I remember rightly, we didn't use an amp, I think. I'm not seeing any amps here. Or maybe. Ah, no, that's right. I did use an amp. But we went for a very vintage, very thick sound. So I'm going through the Neve channel, then the Neve again, bit of an optical compressor. Not a lot going on the EQ there. Going through to decapitator, so being driven quite hard. Then to the tape machine, and then somewhere in the next mix rack, there it is, FG-Stress. Now, I was relatively happy with the bass sound before, but this is it on its own. It doesn't sound like a lot of basses that you would expect. It sounds like a Gibson EB3 really flapping through an amp, late 90s style, late 60s style even, which was very much the intention. So yeah, I think that might have been an 8x10 cabinet or one of the 1x15s with an amp really driving it. So it's got that fuzzy vintage thing. Now let's try that with the FG-Stress on it. Now that's holding it down in the opto mode, which I've not talked about yet. The opto mode, if you select the 10:1, which has a tiny little writing that says opto, you have to set the release to 0 and the attack to 10. And apparently that's emulating an optical compressor like an LA2A or something like that. So on limit mode, I would guess, because 10:1 seems like quite a lot. But still, it's pulling a good 6 to 10 dB off this. I can't hear that much of a difference, but if it's pulling that much volume off the top and it's flapping all over the point, I've found that in the mix the bass holds down better. This is it without.
She taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way.
And this is it with.
She taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way.
It just seems to fit better, even though on its own it doesn't sound like it's doing anything different, which is really quite interesting. So let's look over at the rhythm guitars. I really have used this on everything, almost to prove a point today. So the rhythm guitars, I like to put a compressor on rhythm guitars, not necessarily to compress, but to use the character of it. And what's got character more than a distressor? So let's see what I've done here. So I'm on the rhythm guitar group now, and I've used a 3:1 with some distortion, high pass on the detection circuit. Let's turn that off. So it's really adding some guts and adding some girth. I mean, yes, it is a bit louder as well, but I had to crank the input to get it to sit well. And then it's pushing the decapitator in the tape properly, but yeah, you can see it hitting the THD. It's just tickling that yellow light on the big bits, and it's just shaving a couple of decibels off, but not enough to really suck the life out of the tone. It's just, for me, it's giving it an extra thickness, possibly because of this distortion 2 button. That's the kind of thing I'd be looking for in a compressor on a guitar bus. I'm not looking to use it as a clean controlling mechanism or using it as a character box, essentially. That's a damn good Malbec. It's the Barefoot from California. It's on offer in the UK at the moment. It's well worth checking out. Again, drink responsibly, guys. What else have we got left? So I've covered vocals, rhythm, guitars. I even put this distressor on the lead guitar. And for this, I did use that mid boost on the detector because the solo was quite kind of piercing. Here's it without. And by adding it in, it's controlled that dick that's on the pick attack. By having the attack and release in the middle on this, I've not lost that pick attack. It's not been smoothed into a liquid mush. But instead of it taking over the sound now, it's a lot more even. I've not actually used the FG-Stress on the master bus just yet. Hell, let's do it. Let's stick it in there. Let's start with it on... let's put it before the bus compressors. Because I tend to use 2 bus compressors anyway. I tend to use the VBC Red or the FG Grey, depending on the song, and a touch of the FG Mu with like a 50% mix, just to give it a bit of extra character. So in a blank blank virtual mix rack, let's get FG-Stress in there. Let's start with it on 1-to-1, so doing nothing, and let's see what happens. The output's not calibrated to 5.
Mississippi Queen, she taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way. Left the Cajun lady.
That's interesting. It didn't seem to do anything at first, but as I changed the input and output linked, the volume was flying around. So let's make the attack slower. Let's make the release faster. And let's see what happens when we smash it really hard. And then we'll blend it back in.
Mississippi Queen, she taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way. Left the Cajun lady, we call her Mississippi Queen. You know she was a dancer. She moved better on wine, while the rest of them dudes was a getting their kicks. But I beg your pardon, I was getting mine. Mississippi Queen, if you know what I mean. Mississippi Queen, she taught me everything. This lady, she asked me if I would be her man.
Yeah, so maybe Nuke's a little much.
Mississippi Queen, she taught me everything. We're down around Vicksburg, around Louisiana way. Left the Cajun lady, we call her Mississippi Queen. You know she was a dancer. She moved better on wine, while the rest of them dudes was a getting their
that almost sounds reasonable, smashing the life out of it as a bus compressor. So, I think I'm using it on every part of this track apart from maybe the reverbs, which is a testament to its versatility. Now, I'm sure there are going to be other guys out there who are going to do much more extensive reviews in much more varied places, lots of different genres, lots of different modern and vintage examples. This is literally just a first run through. But this is potentially replacing a lot of the compressors that I use. I mean, I like the 401 red compressor that they make, but this can probably replace it on a lot of places for me. I probably wouldn't use FG-Stress on everything as a matter of course, but having it in my toolbox will be quite useful. I mean, I still like the sound of the 1176 on Nuke mode for drums, probably more than the FG-Stress on a drum bus. I don't know if that's the case in real life, if I was actually using 76s strapped across a drum bus. But, hey, we'll see. When I'm rich and famous, right? But yeah, this mix has got tons of FG-Stresses going, and let's just hit play with all these going.
Yeah. We call the Mississippi Queen. You know she was.
It's probably a testament to Reaper as much as Stephen Slate, but on every channel I'm using barely 1% processor usage between all of these plugins. The FG-Stress is apparently really realistic. I've only used a distressor a couple of times, not enough times to be able to make a comparison. But that's not what this is about for me. This isn't about being exactly the same as the original hardware. This is about sounding good in a lot of different circumstances, which means this is probably going to become my Swiss Army knife. This is probably going to become my go-to compressor for a lot of things where I just need a bit of character. Like, maybe I'm recording some keys or something and I need some light compression that adds a little bit of distortion grit. Oh look, I can do that. Maybe I need a vocal compressor that can make something that's quite harsh sound quite warm. That mid thing right there, that mid button is really going to help me out, I think, making things sound nice and warm. So this is absolutely a triumph, and I can see why people have been demanding it for so long, and I can see why the guys at Slate Digital have been desperate to make sure it's right before it goes out. And absolutely hats off to them. So thank you, Stephen, Fabrice, and all the team. And if you haven't already got yourself a copy of the Everything bundle, go and get one. This is not a paid advertisement. I pay for it myself because it really is worth using every day of the week. So that's the FG-Stress, and I'm going to do more videos on more of these EQs and compressors and preamp modules and all that kind of stuff, because they really are fantastic. They all have a place. They all have different applications in different types of mixes and different kinds of instruments. So if you look back, actually I'm quickly going to change back to this desktop. Have a look at these effects here, depending on if you're watching this in 1080 and you've got a decent screen. Have a look at my effects here. Everything on the master bus is all by Slate. There's a couple of Reaper Zone EQs on the kick drum because I needed a digital EQ to pinpoint a couple of things. There's Reaper Zone gates because I've not yet bought Slate's trigger, but I keep intending to do that. Stephen Slate drums as a little extra sample underneath the top snare, because we didn't actually record this very seriously at the time, so I didn't even put an undersnare mic on it. So I've got a couple of copies of Decapitator by Sound Toys. Echo Boy is still my favourite delay plugin. Reverb is Verb Suite Classic. And everything pretty much is just based around Stephen Slate's stuff. Not because it's cheap, I have plenty of Waves plugins, but because it does the job, and having the virtual mix racks has really simplified my workflow as well. So, what more can I say? More tutorials on those kind of plugins will be coming, and I'll probably edit them rather than doing them live. This I just needed to get out this week because, well, it's a new plugin and I needed to try and get this hot off the press. So, again, thank you all for watching. Hopefully I'll see you very soon for more of these videos. I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios. Take care. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.